The reservation was for 7:30, and I'd been sitting at this corner table for exactly 12 minutes, watching the door like a man waiting for his execution. Not that I expected anything dramatic, just another anniversary dinner with Cass, another evening of forced conversation about her marketing campaigns and my construction projects, another night pretending we still gave a damn about each other. My name is Jack Landry, and I've been married to Cassandra for 15 years. 15 years of watching the woman I thought I knew transform into someone I barely recognized. She used to laugh at my jokes, used to curl up next to me on Sunday mornings, used to care about more than her appearance and her career. Now she treated our marriage like a business arrangement that had stopped being profitable. The bistro was one of those trendy places downtown, exposed brick, Edison bulbs, servers who introduced themselves like they were auditioning for a play. "Hi, I'm Madison, and I'll be taking care of you tonight." The kind of place Cass insisted we go to be seen by the right people. I preferred the dive bar 3 blocks away, but tonight was supposed to be special. My phone buzzed. A text from Cass. "Running late. Start without me." Classic. I ordered a whiskey and settled in to wait, watching the other couples around me. Most looked about as thrilled as I felt. There's something depressing about mandatory romance, about marking time with expensive meals and awkward conversation. 20 minutes later, the door opened and I saw her. Cass walked in wearing a red dress I'd never seen before, her blonde hair perfect, her smile radiant. She looked stunning, the way she always did when she wanted something. But she wasn't alone. Behind her walked a man I recognized but had never formally met, Brett Monroe, the real estate hotshot whose face was plastered on bus benches all over town. Tall, athletic, with a kind of artificial confidence that came from too many easy victories. He had his hand on the small of my wife's back, guiding her through the restaurant like he owned the place. My stomach dropped, but I kept my expression neutral. In construction, you learn to keep your reactions in check when the foundation starts cracking. You assess the damage first, then figure out how to fix it. They approached the table, and Cass's smile grew wider. "Jack, I'd like you to meet Brett Monroe. Brett, this is my husband." Brett extended his hand with a grin that belonged in a toothpaste commercial. "Great to finally meet you, Jack. Cass has told me so much about you." I shook his hand, noting the soft palm, the manicured nails. "Funny, she's never mentioned you at all." Cass laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Well, that's about to change." She reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope, setting it on the table between the breadbasket and my whiskey. "These are divorce papers, Jack. I've already signed them." The restaurant noise faded to a dull hum. I could feel eyes turning toward our table, conversations pausing mid-sentence. Cass had always loved an audience. "Anniversary surprise?" I asked, proud that my voice stayed steady. "You could say that." She slid into the chair across from me while Brett remained standing, his hand now resting on her shoulder. "I'm filing for divorce, and I'm keeping the house. Brett and I are getting married as soon as it's final." I picked up the envelope, noting the law firm's letterhead. Expensive lawyers. Interesting timing. "I wanted to tell you somewhere public," Cass said, her voice carrying just enough to reach the neighboring tables. "So you wouldn't make a scene." Brett squeezed her shoulder. Cass thought it would be easier this way, more civilized. I looked up at him, this man who'd been sleeping with my wife while I worked 60-hour weeks to pay for her lifestyle. Civilized, right. I opened the envelope and scanned the first page. "You know, Brett, there's just one small problem with this plan." "What's that?" His confidence wavered slightly. "The house is in my name. Only my name. Cass signed a prenup 15 years ago." I folded the papers and slipped them back into the envelope. "So while I appreciate the dramatic presentation, you might want to get better lawyers." Cass's perfect smile cracked. "You wouldn't dare." "Wouldn't I?" I stood up, dropping a 20 on the table. "Enjoy your dinner, folks, but you might want to find somewhere else to spend the night." I walked out of that restaurant with my head high and my hands steady, but inside, something fundamental had shifted. The man who'd walked in expecting a boring anniversary dinner was gone. In his place was someone harder, someone who understood that the rules had changed. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. The drive home took 15 minutes, long enough for the shock to wear off and the anger to set in. Not the hot, explosive kind that makes you punch walls, but the cold, calculating kind that builds bridges and demolishes buildings. The kind that plans. Our house sat on Maple Street, a restored Victorian that I'd spent 3 years renovating with my own hands. Every floorboard, every piece of trim, every coat of paint, I'd put my sweat and skill into making it beautiful. It's like Cass had picked out colors and fixtures, but I'd done the work. I parked in the driveway and sat for a moment, looking at the house that was about to become a battleground. The porch light was on, casting long shadows across the lawn I'd planted, the walkway I'd laid stone by stone. This was my home, built with my hands and paid for with my labor. They could have each other, but they weren't getting this. Inside, I poured another whiskey and sat in my leather chair, the one piece of furniture Cass had never tried to replace or redecorate. The house felt different now, charged with possibility and danger. I wasn't the same man who'd left for dinner 2 hours ago. That man had been comfortable with disappointment, resigned to a loveless marriage, and a wife who treated him like a convenient accessory. This man was something else entirely. My phone rang. Cass. Jack, we need to talk. I thought we just did. Don't be difficult. Brett and I are coming over to get some of my things. I smiled, the first genuine smile I'd felt in months. No, you're not. What do you mean, no? I mean, the locks have been changed. I mean, you don't live here anymore. I mean, you made your choice in front of half the town, so now you get to live with it. Silence on the other end. Then, you can't do this. Watch me. I hung up and immediately called my friend Lucas, who worked as a bouncer at Murphy's Bar and had a side business in home security. Luke, I need you to come over. Tonight. Bring your camera equipment. What's going on? My marriage just ended in spectacular fashion, and I have a feeling things are about to get interesting. He arrived 30 minutes later with a toolkit and a grin. Lucas had been my best friend since high school, the kind of guy who'd help you move a body without asking questions. Not that I needed any bodies moved, but the principle stood. So she really did it, he said, setting up a discreet camera by the front window. In public? With her new boyfriend standing right there, hand on her shoulder like he was claiming territory. Damn, what's your play? I watched him work, his thick fingers surprisingly gentle with the delicate electronics. Honestly, I'm making it up as I go, but step one is making sure they can't just walk back in here and take whatever they want. We spent the next hour installing cameras in the living room, kitchen, and front hallway. Nothing in the bedrooms or bathrooms. I wasn't interested in being creepy, just protected. Lucas also helped me change the locks on all the exterior doors, a job that took longer than expected, because the old Victorian had more entrances than a modern house. You know she's going to come back with lawyers, Lucas said as we finished up. Let her. The house is mine, free and clear. She can lawyer up all she wants. What about everything else? Her clothes, her stuff? I considered this. 15 years of shared possessions, of accumulated life. Photo albums and kitchen appliances and books we'd bought together. I'll box it up, put it in storage. She can have it all. I just want her gone. Lucas nodded approvingly. Clean break. Smart. After he left, I sat in the quiet house and tried to process what had happened. This morning I'd been a married man with a routine and a future I could predict. Tonight I was single, betrayed, and planning some kind of response I couldn't yet articulate. But I wasn't broken. That was the surprising part. I felt liberated, like I'd been holding my breath for years and could finally exhale. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This isn't over. B. Brett. My wife's new boyfriend was threatening me via text message. I screenshot the message and saved it to a folder I created called Evidence. Something told me I was going to need it. I woke up the next morning feeling like a man who'd survived a car crash, shaky but oddly grateful to be alive. The house was quiet in a way it hadn't been in years, free from Cass's morning routine of hair dryers and phone calls and the constant background noise of her dissatisfaction. Coffee tasted better when you didn't have to share it with someone who resented your existence. My phone had 17 missed calls and 23 text messages, most from numbers I didn't recognize. Word travels fast in a town this size, and apparently last night's dinner theater had provided entertainment for the entire social circle. I scrolled through the messages, noting who was offering sympathy, who was fishing for details, and who was clearly on Team Cassandra. The most interesting message came from my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Penny Hartwell, a retired librarian who knew everyone's business before they knew it themselves. Jack dear, I have information you might find useful. Stop by when you have time. Mrs. Penny had lived next door for 30 years and had the observational skills of a private investigator. If she had information, it was worth hearing. But first, I had a business to run. Landry Construction might be small, but we had a reputation for quality work and fair dealing. I'd built the company from nothing, starting with a pickup truck and a toolbox, growing it into a crew of 12 good men who trusted me to keep the work coming and the paychecks steady. I arrived at the job site, a kitchen renovation in the historic district, to find my crew already at work. Eddie Kowalski, my foreman and oldest employee, took one look at my face and knew something was wrong. "Boss, you look like someone stole your lunch money." Something like that. I pulled him aside and gave him the abbreviated version. Wife cheating, public divorce announcement, lawyers probably incoming. Eddie whistled low. "That's rough, Jack. You need anything?" "Just keep the guys focused. If this gets messy, I don't want it affecting the business." "You got it. But boss, if you need backup, you know where to find us." Eddie was built like a refrigerator with arms, the kind of guy who settled disputes by existing in the same room as the problem. It was good to know he had my back, even if I hoped it wouldn't come to that. I spent the morning reviewing contracts and checking our financial position. The business was solid. Not wealthy, but stable enough to weather whatever storm was coming. Cass had never shown much interest in the company beyond complaining about the long hours, so at least I didn't have to worry about her trying to claim half of it. Around noon, I drove over to Mrs. Penny's house, a tidy Cape Cod with flower boxes and a front porch that served as her observation post for the entire neighborhood. She met me at the door with a plate of cookies and a conspiratorial smile. "I've been waiting for you, dear. Come in, come in." Her living room was exactly what you'd expect from a retired librarian. Books everywhere, comfortable furniture, and the kind of organized clutter that spoke of a mind that cataloged everything. She poured tea and settled into her chair with the satisfaction of someone about to deliver important news. "I suppose you're wondering what I know about your wife's situation?" "I'm listening." "Well, first of all, this has been going on for months. Since March, at least. I've seen his car in your driveway on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons when you were at work." My jaw tightened. "You're sure it was his car?" "Oh yes, one of those flashy sports cars with his face on the license plate frame. Very subtle." Her tone dripped with disapproval. "But that's not the interesting part." She reached into a drawer and pulled out a small digital camera. "I may be 73, Jack, but I'm not naive. When I see suspicious behavior, I document it." The camera's memory card contained dozens of photos. Brett's car in my driveway, Brett and Cass embracing on my front porch, Brett leaving through my back door while I was presumably at work. The timestamps showed a pattern going back 4 months. "Mrs. Penny, you're a treasure. I haven't shown you the best part yet." She clicked through to a video file. "Last week, I was watering my garden when I heard them talking on your back deck, loud enough to record." The video was shaky, shot through her kitchen window, but the audio was clear. Cass and Brett discussing their plans, their timeline, their strategy for taking Jack for everything he's worth. They talked about my business, my assets, my apparent stupidity in not seeing what was happening. "The house will be mine after the divorce," Cass said on the recording. "He put everything in both our names when we got married." "Are you sure?" Brett's voice. "Positive. And his business is worth more than he pretends. I've seen the books." Except she hadn't. I'd never shown Cass the business financials, and more importantly, the house was in my name only. She was either lying to Brett or genuinely confused about what she was entitled to. Either way, it was useful information. "Mrs. Penny, I need copies of everything." "Already made them, dear. The originals are in my safety deposit box, just in case." I spent another hour with her, learning details I wished I didn't know. The affair had started at a real estate conference where Cass's marketing firm was promoting local businesses. Brett had pursued her aggressively, promising a lifestyle upgrade and social status she couldn't get with a construction worker husband. The betrayal stung, but the intelligence was invaluable. Sun Tzu said to know your enemy, and now I was starting to understand exactly who I was dealing with. That afternoon, I made 2 important phone calls. The first was to my lawyer, Jim Morrison. Not the rock star, just a competent attorney who specialized in family law. I scheduled an appointment and asked him to review the divorce papers Cass had served me. The second call was to a guy I'd met through Eddie, a former cop who now did private investigation work. Tony Ricci was discreet, thorough, and expensive, but I had a feeling I was going to need professional help. "I need background checks on 2 people," I told him. "Complete financial, legal, and personal history, whatever you can find." "How deep do you want me to go?" "Deep enough to know what I'm dealing with." By evening, I was back home, sitting in my workshop in the basement. The workshop was my sanctuary, filled with tools I'd collected over 20 years, projects in various stages of completion, and the smell of sawdust and machine oil that reminded me who I was when everything else felt uncertain. I was sketching plans for a custom cabinet when I heard footsteps on the front porch. Through the security monitor Lucas had installed, I saw Cass and Brett approaching the door. She was carrying a suitcase, he was carrying what looked like an attitude. They rang the doorbell, then knocked, then rang again. I let them wait. Finally, Cass called my phone. "Jack, I know you're in there. Open the door." "Can't do that. Change the locks." "This is my house, too." "Actually, it's not. Check the deed." I heard Brett's voice in the background. "Let me talk to him." "Jack, this is Brett. We need to settle this like adults." "I'm listening." "Cass has a right to her belongings. You can't just lock her out." "Watch me." There was a pause. Then Brett's voice got harder. "You're making this more difficult than it needs to be." "Am I?" "Because from where I'm sitting, you two made it plenty difficult already." I hung up and watched through the monitor as they argued on my porch. Cass was gesturing angrily. Brett was pacing, and I was learning something important about their dynamic. She was the planner, he was the enforcer, but neither of them had expected resistance. They left after 10 minutes, but I knew they'd be back. People like Brett didn't accept defeat gracefully, and people like Cass always had another angle to work. I spent the rest of the evening boxing up Cass's belongings. Clothes, jewelry, personal items, anything that was clearly hers. I wasn't trying to be vindictive, just thorough. She could have her stuff, but she was going to have to ask nicely. Around midnight, as I was taping up the last box, I found something interesting in her jewelry drawer. A second cell phone, hidden behind a stack of earrings. The kind of phone you keep for conversations you don't want your husband to know about. It was password protected, but Cass had never been creative with passwords. I tried our anniversary date, her birthday, her mother's maiden name, nothing. Then I tried Brett's birthday, information I'd gotten from his real estate website. Bingo. The phone contained months of text messages, photos, and call logs that painted a detailed picture of the affair. But more than that, it contained evidence of something I hadn't expected. Fraud. Cass had been using her position at the marketing firm to skim money from client accounts, small amounts that added up to significant theft. She'd been hiding the money in an account she planned to use for her new life with Brett. The phone contained screenshots of bank statements, conversations about moving the money offshore, and detailed plans for disappearing once the divorce was final. My wife wasn't just an adulterer. She was a criminal. I copied everything to a secure drive and put the phone back where I'd found it. Let her think her secrets were still safe. Meanwhile, I had ammunition for whatever war was coming. The last text on the phone was from Brett, sent just an hour ago. "Don't worry about Jack. I'll handle him." I smiled in the darkness of my workshop. Brett Monroe had no idea what he was about to handle. The next morning brought rain and lawyers. Not necessarily in that order, but both arrived with the same gray inevitability. Jim Morrison's office smelled like coffee and old leather, the kind of place where serious conversations happened behind closed doors. He'd reviewed the divorce papers overnight, and his expression told me everything I needed to know before he said a word. "She's fishing, Jack. These papers are more wishful thinking than legal strategy." "Meaning?" "Meaning she's claiming rights to property she doesn't own, assets she can't prove, and support she's not entitled to. Either her lawyer is incompetent, or she's not telling him the truth about your financial situation." I leaned back in the client chair, feeling some tension leave my shoulders. "So what's my position?" "Strong. The house is yours, the business is yours, and Maine isn't a community property state. She gets what she brought into the marriage, plus whatever you agree to give her out of generosity." "And if I'm not feeling generous?" Jim smiled. "Then she gets what she brought into the marriage." We spent an hour crafting a response that was polite, legal, and completely devastating to Cass's expectations. I also mentioned the evidence I'd gathered about her financial activities, though I kept the details vague. Jim's eyebrows went up, but he didn't ask questions he didn't want answered. "Jack, whatever you're planning, make sure it's legal. Divorce courts don't like vigilantes." "I'm not planning anything except protecting what's mine." That was technically true. I wasn't planning anything illegal, just thorough. From Jim's office, I drove to meet Tony Ricci at a diner on the edge of town. Tony looked exactly like what he was, a former cop who'd traded his uniform for civilian clothes but kept the watchful eyes and careful posture that came with 20 years of dealing with people at their worst. "Your wife's boyfriend is interesting," he said, sliding a manila folder across the table. "Brett Monroe, 39, divorced twice, 3 restraining orders from ex-girlfriends, and a business that's mostly smoke and mirrors." I opened the folder and started reading. Brett's real estate empire was built on leveraged debt and creative accounting. He owed money to banks, investors, and at least 2 people who probably didn't report their lending activities to the IRS. His flashy lifestyle was funded by borrowing against properties he didn't actually own. He's broke? Worse than broke. He's in debt to some very unforgiving people. My guess is your wife represents a financial lifeline, a house he can liquidate, a business he can tap into, a way out of his current problems. The picture was becoming clearer. Brett wasn't just stealing my wife, he was trying to steal my life to pay his debts. Cass wasn't just having an affair, she was being played by someone who saw her as a solution to his financial problems. What about Cass? Tony's expression darkened. That's where it gets interesting. Your wife has been very busy at her job. He showed me bank records, transaction histories, and email communications that painted a picture of systematic embezzlement. Cass had been skimming money from client accounts for over a year, hiding it in offshore accounts, and preparing for what looked like a planned disappearance. How much? Best estimate? Around $200,000. I whistled low. That was serious money, the kind that came with serious consequences. Her employers know? Not yet. She's been clever about it. Small amounts from multiple accounts, creative bookkeeping, forged authorizations. But it's all traceable if someone knows where to look. And you know where to look? It's what I do. Tony closed the folder and leaned back. Question is, what do you want to do with this information? I considered my options. I could turn the evidence over to the police and let justice take its course. I could confront Cass directly and demand she return the money. Or I could use the information strategically, as leverage in whatever game we were playing. I need to think about it. Don't think too long. People like this don't stay in one place when they feel pressure. And your wife's boyfriend has the look of someone who runs when things get complicated. I spent the drive home processing what I'd learned. My marriage hadn't just failed. It had been systematically dismantled by two people who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to their criminal enterprise. The betrayal was deeper than adultery. It was theft, fraud, and a complete disregard for everything I'd built. But knowledge was power, and now I had both. That afternoon, I put the first phase of my plan into motion. I called Cass's boss, Richard Whitman, the owner of Whitman Marketing Solutions. Richard and I had worked together on several projects over the years. His firm handled marketing for some of my bigger construction jobs, and we developed a professional relationship built on mutual respect. Richard, it's Jack Landry. I need to talk to you about something sensitive. Sure, Jack. What's on your mind? It's about Cass. There are some things you need to know. We met at his office an hour later. Richard was a straight shooter, the kind of businessman who'd built his company on reputation and integrity. When I showed him the evidence of Cass's embezzlement, his face went through several shades of pale. You're absolutely certain about this? The documentation is solid. Bank records, forged authorizations, the works. Richard studied the papers with the expression of a man watching his business reputation crumble. How long have you known? I found out yesterday. I wanted to give you a chance to handle it internally before it becomes a police matter. I appreciate that, Jack. I really do. He set the papers down and rubbed his temples. She's been with us for 8 years. I trusted her completely. I know the feeling. We talked for another hour about options, consequences, and damage control. Richard would need to audit all of Cass's accounts, notify the affected clients, and decide whether to prosecute or try to recover the money quietly. Either way, Cass's career in marketing was over. Jack, I have to ask, why bring this to me instead of the police? Because you're a decent man who doesn't deserve to be blindsided by this. And because Cass made her choice when she decided to destroy our marriage in public, she wanted consequences, so now she gets them. I left Richard's office feeling like I'd lit a fuse on a very large bomb. By tomorrow, Cass would be unemployed and potentially facing criminal charges. Her plan to take half my assets and disappear with Brett was about to become significantly more complicated. But I wasn't done. That evening, I drove to Brett's apartment complex, a flashy development on the expensive side of town. His unit was on the 3rd floor, with a balcony overlooking the river and a parking space for his ridiculous sports car. I didn't knock on his door or confront him directly. Instead, I did something much more effective. I left copies of his financial records in the mailboxes of every unit in his building, along with a note explaining that their neighbor was a fraud who owed money to dangerous people. By morning, Brett Monroe would be the most unpopular resident in the complex. I also made a few phone calls to his creditors, providing them with his current address and suggesting they might want to have a conversation about his outstanding debts. I didn't lie or misrepresent anything. I just shared publicly available information with people who had a legitimate interest in his whereabouts. The last stop of the evening was Murphy's Bar, where Lucas worked, and half the town gathered to drink and gossip. I needed to control the narrative, to make sure people understood what had really happened at that anniversary dinner. Jack! Lucas waved me over to the bar. Man, everyone's talking about the other night. You okay? I'm fine. Better than fine, actually. I bought a round for the house and told my story to anyone who would listen. Not the whole truth. I wasn't ready to reveal Cass's criminal activities, but enough to make sure people understood who the victim was in this situation. By closing time, the consensus was clear. Cass Landry was a cheating wife who'd humiliated a good man in public, and Brett Monroe was a flashy outsider who'd stolen another man's wife. In a town like ours, that kind of reputation was hard to overcome. I drove home feeling satisfied with the day's work. Cass would wake up tomorrow to find her world considerably smaller and more complicated. Brett would discover that his problems extended far beyond his relationship status. But as I pulled into my driveway, I saw something that made my satisfaction evaporate. The front door of my house was standing open, and every light in the place was on. Someone had been inside. Someone might still be inside. I sat in my truck for a moment, considering my options. I could call the police, but that would take time and might complicate things if Cass claimed she had a right to be there. I could call Lucas, but he was closing the bar and wouldn't be available for another hour. Or I could handle it myself. I grabbed a flashlight from the glove compartment and approached the house carefully. The front door showed no signs of forced entry, which meant whoever had gotten in either had a key or knew how to pick locks. Given that I'd changed the locks yesterday, the second option seemed more likely. The living room was trashed, furniture overturned, drawers emptied, my carefully organized boxes of Cass's belongings scattered across the floor. Someone had been looking for something specific, and they hadn't been subtle about it. I moved through the house room by room, checking for intruders and cataloging the damage. The kitchen was similarly ransacked, the bedrooms torn apart. Even my workshop in the basement had been searched. But whoever had done this was gone now, leaving behind only destruction and a message spray-painted on my bedroom wall. Last warning. I stood in the wreckage of my home, feeling anger rise like a tide. They'd escalated this beyond divorce, beyond adultery, beyond even fraud. They'd violated my sanctuary, destroyed my peace, and threatened me in my own house. Fine. If they wanted to play rough, I could play rough too. I pulled out my phone and called Tony Ricci. "It's Jack. They just broke into my house and trashed the place. I think it's time to take the gloves off." "What do you need?" "Everything. I want to know where they are, what they're planning, and how to hurt them in ways they haven't even thought of yet." "Consider it done?" I hung up and looked around at the destruction. Tomorrow, Cass would lose her job, and Brett would face his creditors. But tonight, they'd made this personal. They had no idea what they'd just unleashed. The call came at 6 a.m, jolting me awake on the couch where I'd spent the night surrounded by the wreckage of my living room. It was Richard Whitman, and he sounded like a man who hadn't slept. "Jack, we have a problem. Cass cleaned out 3 client accounts overnight. She's gone, and she took nearly $50,000 in cash with her." I sat up, instantly alert. "When?" "The transfers went through at 2 a.m. She used her access codes and forged authorizations. By the time our security system flagged the transactions, the money was already moved to an offshore account." So, that was what she'd been looking for in my house. Any evidence I might have gathered about her embezzlement scheme? She'd panicked when she realized I knew about her activities and decided to grab what she could and run. Any idea where she went? "None. But Jack, I have to report this to the police. We're talking about felony theft now." "I understand. Do what you have to do." After Richard hung up, I called Tony Ricci. "They ran. Last night, after trashing my place." "I figured they might. Don't worry, I've got eyes on them." "Where?" "Motel out by the interstate. The Riverside Inn. You know the place." I knew it. A rundown establishment that rented rooms by the hour and didn't ask questions about identification. The kind of place people went when they were hiding from something. "What's the plan?" Tony asked. "I'm working on it. But first, I had a business to run and a house to clean up. I called Eddie and explained the situation, break-in, vandalism, wife on the run with her boyfriend. Eddie listened without judgment, then offered to bring the crew over after work to help with repairs. "Boss, you want us to pay a visit to this motel? Send a message?" "Thanks, but no. I need to handle this myself." "You sure? Because the guys are pretty steamed about what happened. Nobody messes with family." That's how Eddie saw it. I wasn't just his employer, I was family. The crew felt the same way. In their world, loyalty mattered more than law, and someone had crossed a line. "I appreciate it, Eddie. But if this goes wrong, I don't want to drag you guys down with me." I spent the morning cleaning up the destruction, taking photos for insurance purposes, and making a list of everything that had been damaged or stolen. They'd taken my laptop, some cash I kept in a kitchen drawer, and several pieces of jewelry that had belonged to my mother. The violation was worse than the theft. These were my private spaces, my personal belongings, my memories. They'd torn through everything with malicious intent, looking for leverage and leaving chaos in their wake. but they'd also made a crucial mistake. They'd given me legal justification for whatever came next. Around noon, Mrs. Penny knocked on my door with a casserole and a sympathetic expression. "I heard what happened, dear. Are you all right?" "I'm fine. Angry, but fine." I saw them leaving around 3 a.m. That sports car is hard to miss, even in the dark. "You didn't happen to get a license plate number?" She smiled and handed me a piece of paper. "I may be old, Jack, but I'm not useless." Mrs. Penny had not only gotten the plate number, she'd taken photos with her phone and noted the time and direction they'd traveled. The woman was a one-person intelligence operation. "There's something else," she said. "I heard them arguing before they left. Loud voices, lots of anger. It sounded like your wife was upset about something he'd done." Interesting. Trouble in paradise, perhaps. Or maybe Brett was showing his true colors now that the pressure was on. That afternoon, I got a call from Detective Ray Marlowe, an old high school friend who'd joined the police force while I'd gone into construction. We'd stayed in touch over the years, not close friends, but friendly enough to have a beer occasionally and catch up on old times. "Jack, I need to talk to you about a break-in report." "I was going to call you about that." "Not your break-in, and someone trashed Brett Monroe's apartment last night. Really did a number on the place." I kept my voice neutral. "That's unfortunate." "Yeah, real unfortunate. Especially since it happened right around the same time someone broke into your house." "Coincidence?" "Maybe. Or maybe someone's sending messages. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" "Ray, I spent last night cleaning up my own mess. I didn't have time to create new ones." "I figured. But Jack, word of advice? Whatever's going on between you and your wife, keep it legal. This town's too small for a war." After Ray hung up, I called Tony. "Someone hit Brett's apartment?" "Wasn't me, but he's got a lot of enemies right now. Could have been anyone." "The police are asking questions." "Let them ask. You've got an alibi. You were home dealing with your own break-in." That evening, I decided it was time for a more direct approach. I drove out to the Riverside Inn, a collection of shabby buildings clustered around a parking lot that had seen better decades. Brett's sports car was parked outside Unit 12, looking as out of place as a diamond in a coal bin. I didn't knock on their door or announce my presence. Instead, I parked across the street and waited. Patience was a skill I'd learned in construction. Sometimes you had to wait for concrete to set, for permits to be approved, for the right moment to make your move. Around 8 o'clock, Brett emerged from the room and walked to the motel office. He looked haggard, unshaven, like a man who'd been running on adrenaline and bad decisions. While he was gone, I approached Unit 12 and listened at the door. I could hear Cass inside, talking on the phone. Her voice was strained, desperate. "I don't care what it costs. I need those documents tonight." "No, he can't know where we are, because he's not as stupid as we thought he was." She was talking to a lawyer, trying to salvage her legal position, but from the sound of it, things weren't going well. Brett returned a few minutes later, and I retreated to my truck to listen. Even through the thin motel walls, I could hear them arguing. "This is your fault," Cass's voice, shrill with panic. "You said he was harmless." How was I supposed to know he'd fight back? Brett's voice, defensive and angry. "Now Richard's freezing all the accounts, the police are asking questions, and we're stuck in this dump with nowhere to go." "We've got the cash you took." $50,000. That was supposed to be our starting fund, not our entire future." Their voices dropped, but the argument continued. I could hear the stress, the recriminations, the growing realization that their plan had fallen apart. My phone buzzed with a text from Tony. "Police are looking for them. Warrant issued an hour ago." I smiled in the darkness. The net was closing, and they were trapped in a shabby motel room with their dreams crumbling around them. But I wasn't done with them yet. I drove home and spent the evening making phone calls. To Richard Whitman, providing him with their location. To Detective Marlowe, sharing what I'd observed. To several of Brett's creditors, letting them know where they might find their debtor. By morning, the Riverside Inn was going to be a very popular destination. But first, I had one more message to send. I returned to the motel around midnight, when the parking lot was empty except for Brett's car and a few long-term residents who minded their own business. I approached the sports car with a can of spray paint and a sense of poetic justice. Across the windshield, in bright red letters, I wrote, "Thief." On the driver's side door, "Fraud." On the passenger side, "Adulterer." I wasn't vandalizing property. I was providing public service announcements. As I finished my artwork, I heard a door open behind me. Brett stood in the doorway of Unit 12, wearing boxer shorts and a t-shirt, his face twisted with rage. "You son of a—" "Careful, Brett. There are laws about threatening people." He stepped toward me, fists clenched. You think you're so smart, don't you? Smarter than someone who borrows money from dangerous people to fund a lifestyle he can't afford. That stopped him cold. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that you owe money to half the state. Your business is a shell game, and you thought my wife was your ticket out of debt. His face went pale. You don't know what you're talking about. I know exactly what I'm talking about. I also know that your creditors are very interested in your current location. Brett looked around the parking lot nervously, as if expecting armed men to emerge from the shadows. What do you want? I want you to understand something. This isn't just about my wife anymore. You broke into my house, destroyed my property, and threatened me. That makes it personal. I didn't... Save it. You and Cass made your choice when you decided to steal from me, lie to me, and treat me like an obstacle to be removed. Now you get to live with the consequences. I walked back to my truck, leaving Brett standing in the parking lot in his underwear, staring at his vandalized car. In the window of Unit 12, I could see Cass watching, her face pale in the fluorescent light. They looked like what they were, two people who'd overplayed their hand and lost everything. But I still wasn't finished with them. Tomorrow was the town's annual Founders' Day festival, a community celebration that drew hundreds of people to the downtown area. Food vendors, live music, local politicians making speeches, and a general atmosphere of small-town pride and gossip. It was the perfect venue for the final act of this drama. Founders' Day dawned bright and clear, the kind of perfect summer morning that made small-town festivals feel like Norman Rockwell paintings. Main Street was closed to traffic, lined with white tents selling everything from homemade fudge to hand-carved furniture. The smell of barbecue and funnel cakes drifted through the air, mixing with the sounds of children laughing and local bands tuning their instruments. I walked through the crowd with a sense of anticipation that had nothing to do with cotton candy or carnival games. Today was the day I'd been building toward, the culmination of a week that had transformed me from a betrayed husband into something else entirely. Lucas found me near the bandstand, where the mayor was setting up for his annual welcome speech. You look like a man with a plan. Something like that. Want to share? Better if you don't know the details. Just trust me and be ready to move when I give you the signal. Lucas nodded. He'd known me long enough to understand when I was serious, and he'd never questioned my judgment when it mattered. What's the signal? You'll know it when you see it. The festival was in full swing by noon, with most of the town gathered in the cordoned-off area around the bandstand. I moved through the crowd, greeting people I'd known for years, accepting condolences about my marriage, and generally playing the role of the wronged but dignified husband. Everyone wanted to know about Cass and Brett, about the divorce, about what had really happened that night at the restaurant. I gave them just enough information to keep them interested without revealing my hand. She made her choice, I told anyone who asked. Now she has to live with it. Around 1 o'clock, I spotted them near the food trucks. Cass looked haggard despite her careful makeup, wearing sunglasses that couldn't quite hide the stress lines around her eyes. Brett was trying to project confidence, but his expensive clothes couldn't disguise the fact that he looked like a man who hadn't slept in days. They were arguing in low voices, the kind of tense conversation that couples have when they're trying not to make a scene in public. Perfect. I approached them with a smile that felt like putting on a mask. Cass, Brett, what a surprise to see you here. They turned, and I could see the shock in their faces. They'd expected me to hide, to avoid public confrontation, to slink away in shame. Instead, here I was, confident and relaxed, treating them like old friends. Jack, Cass said carefully, we didn't expect to see you. Really? This is my town, my community. Where else would I be? Brett stepped slightly forward, trying to assert dominance. Look, Jack, we don't want any trouble. Trouble? Why would there be trouble? You two are in love. You're starting a new life together. I should congratulate you. My tone was perfectly pleasant, but something in my eyes must have warned them that this conversation wasn't going the way they'd expected. Cass's hand found Brett's arm, a gesture that looked protective but felt desperate. We should go, she said. So soon? But the festival's just getting started. Besides, I have something that belongs to you. I reached into my jacket and pulled out Cass's second phone, the one I'd found in her jewelry drawer. Her face went white. I believe you dropped this. She reached for it instinctively, then stopped herself. I don't know what that is. Sure you do. It's your business phone, the one with all those interesting text messages and bank records. Brett looked confused. What's he talking about? Nothing, Cass said quickly. He's just trying to cause problems. Am I? Because I think the police would be very interested in what's on this phone. All those creative accounting practices at your job, all that money you moved to offshore accounts. You're lying, Brett said, but his voice lacked conviction. Ask her. Ask your girlfriend about the $200,000 she stole from her employer. Ask her about the fake authorizations and the forged documents. Ask her why the FBI is looking for both of you. That last part wasn't true, yet, but it had the desired effect. Brett turned to stare at Cass, who looked like she was about to be sick. Cass, what's he talking about? It's complicated. Complicated? Brett's voice rose, attracting attention from nearby festival goers. You told me the money was from your savings. Keep your voice down, Cass hissed, but it was too late. A crowd was gathering, drawn by the drama unfolding near the funnel cake stand. I recognized faces from around town, neighbors, business associates, people who'd known me for years and were curious about this very public confrontation with my estranged wife and her boyfriend. The money was stolen? Brett continued, his voice carrying across the festival grounds. You made me an accessory to theft? It wasn't supposed to happen like this, Cass said desperately. Jack was supposed to just accept the divorce and move on. We were supposed to have time to figure things out. Figure things out? The police are looking for us. My apartment was destroyed. People are calling me a fraud. Because you are a fraud, I said helpfully. Your real estate business is built on debt you can't repay, you owe money to some very unpleasant people, and you thought marrying my wife would solve your financial problems? The crowd was growing larger, and I could see phones coming out, people recording what was shaping up to be the most entertaining Founders' Day festival in years. Brett's face was red with anger and embarrassment. You think you're so clever, don't you? You think you've won? I think I've exposed the truth. Everything else is just consequences. Consequences? Brett stepped closer, his hands clenched into fists. I'll show you consequences. That was the moment I'd been waiting for. Brett, angry and humiliated, making threats in front of dozens of witnesses with their phones recording every word. Are you threatening me, Brett, in front of all these people? I'm promising you that this isn't over. Actually, it is. I pulled out my own phone and played a recording, one of the conversations Tony Ricci had captured from their motel room, where Brett and Cass discussed breaking into my house, destroying my property, and making me pay for interfering. The crowd listened in fascination as Brett's voice came through the phone's speakers, describing in detail how they'd ransacked my house looking for evidence of Cass's embezzlement. That's illegal wiretapping, Cass shouted. Actually, it's not. You were in a public place speaking loud enough for anyone to hear. No expectation of privacy. Brett lunged at me then, exactly as I'd hoped he would. I sidestepped easily, construction work keeps you agile, and let him stumble past me into the crowd. Several people reached out to steady him, and I made sure to look concerned rather than satisfied. Brett, please. Violence isn't the answer. He spun around, his face twisted with rage. You destroyed everything. My business, my reputation, my future. No, Brett. You did that yourself when you decided to steal another man's wife and break into his house. The crowd murmured approval. In their eyes, I was the victim here, the wronged husband who'd been betrayed and violated but was handling it with dignity and restraint. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, addressing the crowd directly, I apologize for disrupting your festival. I never wanted any of this to be public, but since it is, you should know the truth. I gave them an abbreviated version of the story. The public humiliation at the restaurant, the affair, the break-in, the theft from Cass's employer. I kept my tone reasonable and factual, letting the facts speak for themselves. When I finished, the crowd's sympathy was entirely with me. These were my neighbors, people who'd watched me build a business and contribute to the community for 20 years. They knew who I was, and they could see who Cass and Brett had become. Jack, called out Mrs. Henderson from the library board, what can we do to help? Nothing, ma'am. Justice has a way of working itself out. As if on cue, Detective Marlowe appeared at the edge of the crowd, his uniform and badge causing people to step aside. He approached us with the measured pace of a man who'd dealt with plenty of domestic disputes, but rarely had them handed to him on such a convenient platter. Folks, I need everyone to step back and give us some room. The crowd reluctantly moved back, but they didn't disperse. This was better than the fireworks display they'd been planning for later. Jack, Brett, Cass, Ray nodded to each of us. I understand there's been some kind of disturbance. No disturbance, Detective, I said. Just a conversation that got a little heated. That's not what I heard. Something about threats and stolen money? Brett started to speak, but Cass cut him off. There's been a misunderstanding. Jack is upset about our divorce, and he's making wild accusations. Ray looked at me. Jack? I handed him Cass's phone and a folder containing copies of all the evidence Tony had gathered. "I think you'll find this interesting reading, Ray." He flipped through the documents, his expression growing more serious with each page. "Cass, I'm going to need you to come down to the station and answer some questions. Am I under arrest?" "Not yet, but I strongly advise you to bring a lawyer." Brett was backing away slowly, trying to blend into the crowd, but Ray noticed. "Brett, you too. We need to discuss some complaints that have been filed against you." "What complaints?" "Fraud, theft by deception, and conspiracy. Plus there's the matter of the break-in at Jack's house." "You can't prove I had anything to do with that." Ray held up Cass's phone. "Actually, I think we can." The next few minutes were chaos. Cass started crying, claiming she'd been manipulated and coerced. Brett tried to run, but was tackled by 2 of my construction workers who happened to be in the crowd. The festival goers cheered like they were watching a particularly good football game. I stood in the middle of it all, watching my former life fall apart in spectacular fashion. Cass was led away in handcuffs, still protesting her innocence. Brett was placed into a separate police car, his expensive clothes torn and his face bruised from his encounter with the pavement. As the police cars pulled away, the crowd began to disperse, but not before dozens of people stopped to shake my hand, pat my back, and offer their support. I was no longer the man whose wife had left him. I was the man who'd fought back and won. Lucas appeared at my side, grinning broadly. "Well, that was something." "It's not over yet," I said. "But it's a good start." Mrs. Penny pushed through the crowd and hugged me fiercely. "Jack Landry, I'm proud of you. You handled that with more class than they deserved." "Thank you, Mrs. Penny. I couldn't have done it without your help." As the festival resumed around us, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Complete satisfaction. Not happiness, exactly. Too much had been destroyed for that, but the deep contentment that comes from a job well done. Cass and Brett had wanted to play games with my life, to treat me like a convenient obstacle to their ambitions. They'd underestimated me completely, assuming that a construction worker couldn't match their sophistication and cunning. They were about to learn how wrong they'd been. But first, I was going to enjoy a funnel cake and watch the fireworks. After all, it was Founders' Day, and I had plenty to celebrate. 3 weeks later, I stood in my renovated living room, admiring the work my crew had done to repair the damage from the break-in. New furniture, fresh paint, and a security system that would make Fort Knox jealous. The house felt like mine again, clean and peaceful and free from the toxic energy that had poisoned it for so long. The legal proceedings had moved with surprising speed. Cass had been charged with embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy. The evidence was overwhelming: bank records, forged documents, recorded conversations, and her own confession when faced with the prospect of serious prison time. Her lawyer had negotiated a plea deal: full restitution, 5 years probation, and a felony conviction that would follow her for the rest of her life. Brett's situation was more complicated. In addition to the charges related to the break-in and theft, his creditors had finally caught up with him. His real estate business had collapsed, his assets were frozen, and he was facing both criminal prosecution and civil lawsuits that would keep him in court for years. The divorce had been finalized with remarkable efficiency once Cass's criminal activities came to light. She'd signed away any claim to my property in exchange for my agreement not to pursue additional charges. She got nothing except her personal belongings and the knowledge that she'd destroyed her life for a man who'd abandoned her the moment things got difficult. Brett had tried to pin everything on Cass, claiming he'd been manipulated and deceived, but the recorded conversations proved otherwise, showing him as an active participant in planning the break-in and discussing ways to intimidate me into submission. Justice, it turned out, was more satisfying than revenge. I was arranging books on my new shelves when the doorbell rang. Through the security monitor, I saw a woman I didn't recognize, middle-aged, professionally dressed, with the kind of serious expression that usually meant official business. "Mr. Landry, I'm Sarah Mitchell from the district attorney's office. Could I speak with you for a moment?" I invited her in, curious about what new development might require a personal visit from the DA's office. "Mr. Landry, I wanted to thank you personally for your cooperation in the prosecution of your ex-wife and Mr. Monroe. Your evidence was crucial in securing their convictions. I just provided what I found. Justice did the rest. There's something else. We've been investigating Mr. Monroe's business practices, and we've uncovered evidence of a much larger fraud scheme. He was running what amounts to a Ponzi scheme, using new investors' money to pay returns to earlier investors while skimming profits for his lifestyle. That was interesting, but not surprising. Brett had always struck me as someone who lived beyond his means. The total amount of the fraud is over $2 million. Dozens of victims, mostly elderly people who trusted him with their retirement savings. Now I was paying attention. How can I help? We're seizing his assets to compensate the victims, but there's not much left. However, there is one significant asset that might be recoverable." She handed me a document. "Mr. Monroe took out a large insurance policy on his life, naming your ex-wife as beneficiary. We believe this was part of their plan to disappear with stolen money. The policy is worth $500,000. I read through the document, noting the dates and signatures. What does this have to do with me? The policy was purchased with fraudulent funds, which makes it void. But more importantly, we found evidence that Mr. Monroe was planning to fake his own demise to collect the insurance money. Your ex-wife was going to be the grieving girlfriend who collected the payout and disappeared. The audacity of their plan was breathtaking. They'd intended to fake Brett's demise, collect $500,000 in insurance money, and start new lives somewhere with no extradition treaties. I would have been left with a ruined marriage and financial obligations while they lived comfortably on stolen money. So what happens now? Mr. Monroe is facing additional charges for insurance fraud and conspiracy. Your ex-wife is being charged as an accessory, and the money will go to compensate his victims. After she left, I sat in my quiet house and marveled at how completely I'd underestimated the scope of their betrayal. It hadn't just been about adultery or even theft. They'd been planning to destroy my life completely while enriching themselves through multiple criminal schemes. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Lucas calling from Murphy's bar. "Jack, you need to get down here. There's something you need to see." I found him at the bar, nursing a beer and watching the evening news on the television mounted above the bottles. The lead story was about Brett's arrest on the additional charges, complete with footage of him being led away in handcuffs and a detailed explanation of his fraud scheme. "Look at that," Lucas said with satisfaction. "Your boy Brett's going to be famous." The news report was thorough, describing how Brett had stolen millions from elderly investors while living a lavish lifestyle funded by their life savings. They interviewed several victims, people in their 70s and 80s who'd lost everything to his schemes. "The investigation began," the reporter said, "when local businessman Jack Landry provided evidence to authorities about Monroe's relationship with his ex-wife, who was also involved in the fraud. My name was mentioned as the person whose evidence had helped uncover the larger scheme. In the space of a month, I'd gone from being the town's most publicly humiliated husband to being the man who'd helped bring down a major fraud operation. "Drinks are on the house tonight," the bartender announced, "for the man who took down the crooks." The bar erupted in applause, and I found myself surrounded by neighbors and friends who wanted to shake my hand and buy me drinks. It was overwhelming and gratifying in equal measure. But the real satisfaction came later, when I was back home in my peaceful house, reading a letter that had arrived in the afternoon mail. It was from one of Brett's victims, an elderly woman named Margaret Foster, who'd lost her entire retirement savings to his schemes. She thanked me for providing the evidence that had exposed the fraud and helped the authorities recover some of the stolen money. "You probably saved my life," she wrote. "I was considering ending it all when I realized I'd lost everything. Now there's hope that I might get some of my money back, and more importantly, that man can't hurt anyone else. Thank you for having the courage to fight back." I read the letter 3 times, feeling emotions I couldn't quite name. When I'd started this journey, I'd been motivated by anger and a desire for revenge against the people who'd betrayed me. But somewhere along the way, it had become about something larger, about justice, about protecting other victims, about standing up to people who thought they could take whatever they wanted without consequences. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. For a moment, I thought it might be another threat from Brett or Cass, but when I opened it, I found something different. "Mr. Landry, this is Detective Martinez with the State Police Financial Crimes Unit. We'd like to offer you a position as a consultant on fraud investigations. Your instincts and investigative skills are exactly what we need. Are you interested in discussing this opportunity?" I stared at the message, surprised by the offer. A second career in law enforcement had never occurred to me, but the idea was intriguing. I'd discovered I had a talent for uncovering deception and building cases against people who thought they were too clever to be caught, but that was a decision for another day. Tonight, I was content to sit in my restored house, surrounded by the life I'd built and protected, knowing that the people who'd tried to destroy me were facing the consequences of their choices. I poured myself a whiskey and stepped out onto my back porch, looking up at the stars that were just becoming visible in the darkening sky. The air was cool and clean, carrying the scent of the garden I'd planted and the sound of crickets beginning their evening chorus. Somewhere across town, Cass was probably sitting in a cheap apartment, contemplating a future that included a felony conviction, financial ruin, and the knowledge that she'd thrown away everything good in her life for a man who'd abandoned her the moment he faced consequences. Brett was in a jail cell, awaiting trial on charges that would likely send him to prison for years. His flashy lifestyle was over, his business destroyed, his reputation in ruins. They'd both gotten exactly what they deserved. I raised my glass to the night sky, not in celebration, but in acknowledgement. I'd learned something important about myself over the past month, that I was capable of more than I'd ever imagined, both in terms of endurance and in terms of strategic thinking. I'd also learned that sometimes the best revenge isn't about hurting your enemies. It's about protecting the innocent and making sure justice prevails. The construction business had taught me that you can't build something lasting on a weak foundation. Cass and Brett had built their plans on lies, theft, and betrayal, so their collapse had been inevitable. I'd just helped it happen a little faster. Now I had the chance to build something new, not just a restored house or a successful business, but a life based on truth, integrity, and the satisfaction that comes from doing the right thing even when it's difficult. I finished my whiskey and went back inside, locking the door behind me and setting the security system that would protect my sanctuary. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities, but tonight I was at peace. The table had turned, the accounts were settled, and justice had been served. And for the first time in years, that was enough.